Adam here at Gen Con 2024 in the Brotherwise room, and I am here with...
My name's Andrew Fishcer, and I'm the lead designer on the new Stormlight Archive role-playing game.
Andrew, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you do for Brotherwise, maybe how you got connected with Brotherwise, maybe how you started reading Brandon, just a little bit about that.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm the lead designer on the Stormlight Archive RPG, and so I oversee a team of designers and writers in making the handbook and all of the rules for the role-playing game. I kind of got into this because I've been in the industry for about 15 years, and in that time, I've worked on a lot of role-playing games with big licenses, things like Star Wars, Warhammer, and I have a lot of experience working in taking big IPs, big stories, and adapting them to the tabletop. And for that reason, Brotherwise reached out to me when they were starting the kind of bringing together the team for this game. And I've been a big fan of Brandon's work. It's cinematic and really captures you. And so I couldn't say no to the opportunity, right? So yeah, so I came on originally as a consultant, but eventually as lead designer to oversee the whole team.
Excellent. So you've been working in this space for a long time, and obviously have a lot of familiarity with RPGs. What would you say to current RPG players? What can they look forward to with their experience with the Stormlight RPG?
Yeah, so one of the things that was really important to us was making the game familiar. We wanted to kind of balance familiarity for existing role-playing gamers along with some novelty, right? And so you can expect a pretty easy transition into this game. You're going to see some familiar aspects from other role-playing games you played, but as soon as you start, those kind of get you in the door. You know, you're rolling a d20, you're making tests, it's going to work a lot like you're familiar with, but then you start getting to some of the new, unique things we've introduced, from the more narrative mechanics, as well as all the specific mechanics to handle Roshar, surges, Spren, and all of that specifically. And so I think it's going to be easy onboarding, but then you're going to find a whole host of systems that are going to feel really unique to you as you get to explore this kind of brand new system.
You mentioned the word balance a minute ago, and I want to just prod a little bit into that. Roshar is a world, it's a place that has some incredibly powerful beings, creatures, and also people who don't have any of that.
Yeah.
What did you do? How did you attack that problem of being able to balance the game where you're able to play as someone who has incredible power and someone who, I don't want to say powerless, but doesn't have the same kind of power?
Yeah, it's not throwing around surges or anything. Yeah, so when it comes to mechanical balance like that, that was a big important factor for us. And you know, we see a lot of invested characters flying around in the books, but we also have a lot of characters like ATTN, who are, you know, not throwing around special powers. And so we wanted both of those play styles to be incredibly viable, right? And so ultimately, one of the tricks is that to be true to the setting, shard blades have to be powerful, surges have to be powerful. You know, they are going to be stronger than just having your side sword, right? And they have to be, because otherwise that wouldn't be true to the books and true to the setting. But we have some mechanical tricks to kind of ensure that everybody is having as the same amount of fun and the same amount of storytelling at the table. So one of the big things, to get a little nitty gritty, one of the big things is opportunity cost. So to pursue Radiant Ideals, there's kind of two ways you progress your character in the game. One is by leveling up and gaining, you know, as you get experience with your combat and conversations and everything, you're going to grow your characters in kind of a linear way. But you're also going to be pursuing personal goals. This could be anything from winning your shard blade to swearing an ideal. And so these, and then when you accomplish these goals, you're going to earn powerful rewards. And these are kind of the two ways you're going to progress your character. Now, a Radiant character is going to have to spend levels learning their Radiant powers and earning their Radiant powers, and then they're going to have to use their goals to pursue ideals and swear ideals with their Spren. And so they're dedicating a lot of their progression to these fantastical radiant powers they have. Meanwhile, we also have what we call our heroic paths, which are paths that aren't for invested characters, but are for your more mundane characters who are, just running around without Stormlight. And these have a lot of the kind of staples of the staple abilities of the game. And as you get deeper into those trees, if you invest a lot of time and energy into those trees, they get to a lot of powerful narrative abilities that give you uh, the power to have those kind of cool narrative moments we see from a lot of other characters. So heroic characters who stick just with those heroic trees are going to get the opportunity to go and get those more powerful narrative abilities. So while they're not throwing around surges, they get an opportunities to do other kind of tricky things. And so while they might not have surges, they're still having their storytelling moments. And the setting has when we're talking just strict numerical benefit, the setting has some other powerful tools like fabrials and shards that can keep an uninvested character on par with a Radiant.
Excellent. I asked before what you would say to experienced RPG players. What about me, someone who's completely inexperienced in the world of TTRPGs? What would you say to me coming into the Stormlight RPG?
Yeah, well, at first I'd say to check out, I think it's called The Next Step. It's our level 0 adventure. And that lets you kind of get an introduction to the game, and it lets you build your character as you play. So it's a very cool way to kind of, you don't have to sit down and do all the character building and immediately start worrying about all the mechanics. Instead, you just sit at the table and start role-playing, and your character is kind of created through the process of playing the game. So that's a good place for new players to start. But beyond that, I would say that while our system has a lot of detail and crunch to represent surges and all the different combats you're going to get into, one great thing about this not only is the setting that I presume you are very familiar with, but and but not only that, but the way the setting functions and the way the stories of the Stormlight Archive function, like we follow Kaladin and Shallan from Humble's beginnings to great power throughout the stories. Similarly, the mechanics of the game are structured in a very similar way, where you're going to start out as very simple, heroic characters down at level 1, and then you're going to slowly build up your power set and potentially a relationship with a Spren, and then potentially surges and other abilities. And this plot line of your character and kind of the staging of complexity of your character really nicely eases you into the experience. So there's a lot of different rules for surges and everything in the game, but when you start out, you don't need to worry about it. You just need to make a simple character with a couple basic abilities and start rolling some dice. And then, as you attract a Spren and keep playing, you're going to add on those abilities in a nice progressive way that's going to let you ease into each new ability. So I think you'd be able to quickly jump in and get role playing.
You speak of the setting, Roshar. Obviously, an incredibly different place to what we experience here. To you, what makes Roshar such an ideal place to have an RPG?
Yeah, to have an RPG, I'd say that this maybe not isn't quite Roshar, but the Stormlight Archive books in general. One thing I think Brandon has really done in these books is he's kind of mechanized introspection. He characters literally grow in literal power through learning more about themselves and through personally developing. And so that's an amazing tool for a role-playing game. Role-playing games can always tell stories of external adventure, but it takes a really experienced and conscientious role player to really tell an introspective personal story about their character. And this gives you incentive and mechanics to do it right off the bat, and for players to tell really personal stories about their characters in a way that other settings don't necessarily incentivize. And so through the ideals and through the rewards you earn from those, it really encourages you to think about who is my character and why are they doing the things they do. And so I think that element of the books makes this a very unique role-playing experience and just perfect for the medium.
How do you see people who have maybe a little bit more knowledge in the books and who have the tabletop gaming experience? How do you see, I'm formulating this question as we're talking. how do you see them being able to really interact with the world and the story in a way that will make them feel like they're, again, as I've heard Brandon say this, expanding on what he's done and really doing what he's doing by creating the world? I don't know if there's a question in there that you can address. It's kind of convoluted, but
How are we giving the players and the GMs authorship over the setting? Yeah, that's an interesting question. Well, I think, even Brandon talked about it in our meetings together, right? One of our goals is to lay out a perfect canon starting place for your story, but it's just that. It's a starting place. And your stories can go in any direction from there. We have a whole tool set in our GM section on telling canon stories and how to kind of keep, if you want to keep your stories in canon, how to do it, and how to kind of keep it in alignment with the plot lines of the books. But we also, we're handing you a toolkit and we give you permission to make the story your own, right? And even Brandon is giving people permission to make this story their own. I won't say that your table's interpretation is canon, but you can have fun with it, right? And so ultimately, the game is a toolbox, and we encourage you to run wild with it, especially in our adventures. Uh, we've gotten we have the ability to really introduce a lot of fun toys, pieces of the setting that characters are going to get to play with, and we really set you up to. We put the power in your hands, and so I do think people are going to. I don't think they're going to need any encouragement to make it their own. Let's just say that.
you mentioned GMing, and I'm going to get into a little nitty gritty right here. For experienced GMs, or maybe I'll say for inexperienced GMs who maybe want to explore doing that side of the table here, what would you say to them? Maybe advice or tool sets that maybe you can specifically speak to that you think would be beneficial for someone who again wants to maybe experiment on that side of the table?
Yeah, I mean, brand new GMs, it's intimidating first time, right? There are one thing I'll say, we have a GM chapter on how to specifically use the tool in this role-playing game, but resources for GMs go way beyond our game. And like one of the great things about the role-playing hobby right now is just how many new people have come into it over the last 10 years. And there are so many resources for helping onboard GMs. One thing that can be really intimidating about Roshar specifically for GMing is just the sheer amount of stuff that you have to think about. Not only the canon, but also, if you have Radiants in your party, managing the little Spren companions, managing their relationship to you and their relationship to your introspective journey. And so, or to a character's introspective journey. And, say you have 4 or 5 different players in your party, that's a lot for a GM to juggle, and that's a little intimidating. And that's one thing that we've really thought about with how we've structured the system is we don't want to just leave that to the GM to juggle all of that burden, but instead we've tried to empower the players and trying to give them tools to own their own narrative and inject their own ideas into the story, all the way from the plot die that you roll alongside the D20 that can inject opportunities and complications into the story, puts that into the hands of the players, but the control of their Spren, the control of their goals and how that relates to their ideals is all in the player's hands. And so we're handing a lot of the storytelling potential to the players. So to those new GMs, one of the beautiful things about the way this role-playing game handles the system is that you're going to be able to collaborate with your players in telling the story. It is not you, the storyteller, having to entertain your 4 friends for the night. Instead, it is your group collectively telling a story in Roshar together. And that's a lot more fun, a lot more collaborative, and a lot less scary for new GMs.
So, Andrew, you've been working on this project for a little while now, about a year and a half. Obviously, that's a long time to be working on the game. And this is going to be a hard question to answer, I think. What is something that you're particularly proud of that you've done for the Stormlight RPG?
I mean, there's a lot. We'll get a bullet list. Well, I mean, yeah, it lists all the systems. No, there's some really cool stuff in the Surges that I worked with Ross on. However, one of my personal contributions that I'm very proud of is our combat rules and you're going to be using that a lot. We have a we've really emphasized all sorts of scene types, conversations, endeavors. We want to mechanize all parts of the game, but with combat, we've tried to make it quicker and easier to just drop right into. Uh, you have some interesting decisions at the heart of combat. Not only do you have a flexible action system that decides where you can kind of decide what you want to do each turn and how, but we have a very interesting initiative system where you have to make every round of combat, you have to make this choice between going fast and having fewer actions or going slow and having more. And it makes that process of jumping into combat and who goes when very dynamic, collaborative. You're not rolling for initiative and writing every single name in the combat down or anything. Instead, you're just jumping right in and making interesting decisions right away. So while there's a lot of things in the setting I could dive into about how we've exactly represented surges and everything, I think one of the things I'm most proud of is that combat system and how it dives right into it.
Makes it probably feel a little bit more like reality where you have to make decisions for life.
Yeah, split second decision right as you start, right? And one that's going to be pretty meaningful.
You mentioned before mechanizing the non-combat aspects of the game. Could you dive a little bit more into that and, I guess, expand a little bit more on the non-combat mechanization?
Yeah, so we have a few different scene types that we give you instructions and rules for. Beyond combat, there's conversations, which is, well, pretty self-explanatory, talking to people. But then there's endeavors, which kind of represents the other things you might be doing. That might be exploring, sneaking into a place, performing a heist or whatever. Any type of scene where you're doing adventurous stuff, but it's not fighting somebody or talking to somebody. It's kind of that player versus environment type scene. And so for both of these, we give you structures to help you tell that story. In conversations, we have a mental resource that the characters have called their focus. This can power some of their abilities and talents, but it can also be used in conversation to represent their presence in the conversation, their wherewithal, and their ability to kind of stand against arguments or resist things. And this gives a dynamism to conversations beyond just, I roll and see if I convince you, but instead I can kind of wear you down, or you can push back against arguments, and there's a bit more of a back and forth. So we wanted to take some of our rules and pull them into that. Additionally, some of your character abilities, especially some of those powerful heroic talents we were talking about earlier, they relate to things like conversations and endeavors. You're not going to find all your talents or just hit people harder. Instead, you might be able to pull upon contacts or quickly convince somebody or pull an ally to your aid to throw in a bribe or another argument into a conversation. So your abilities are going to be more powerful in these non-combat scenes and give you these kind of cool highlight moments. We really wanted, Roshar is a world of war, but in the books we see all sorts of other types of adventure beyond combat, and so we knew that was an important part of the system to us.
I have just two final questions for you because I don't want to take too much of your time. We spoke of the setting a little bit. How do the high storms come into play in the game?
Well, I mean, they're pretty important for Radiant characters because they're the source of your power, right? So you're going to be carrying around spheres with you that hold your reserves of investiture, if you're Stormlight, and the high storms are how you're going to be able to recharge that. If you're in a place, if you're in a place or a time where your high storm isn't showing up, you're potentially without your power or having to keep your reserves and carefully count your remaining spheres. Things like the Weeping, things like being in Shadesmar, or just in other situations where a high storm isn't going to roll through. Beyond that, high storms are a amazing narrative device for setting scenes and creating tension. We have a cool system in the game called events, and these are kind of timers that the GM can use. These can be positive timers or negative timers, and they tie into the plot die and opportunities and complications. As they come up, they can advance these events. And the perfect example of one of these events is the arrival of a high storm. In fact, in one of our demos, that's the timer that is kind of barreling down on you as you're, fighting desperately in these chasms. You see a high storm approaching, and as complications get rolled, it charges up this event, and that high storm, that storm wall gets closer and closer, and you have to worry about what's going to happen when it gets there. And so not only does it tie directly to the mechanics of the Radiance, but it's an amazing storytelling device for creating tension and, giving the GM a tool to maybe move a scene along.
The one last thing that we haven't talked about at all here are Spren. How are Spren going to be represented here? What can those who choose a Radiant path, what are they going to be able to do with their Spren, I guess, utility-wise? If you could dig a little bit into that.
Yeah, so Spren are going to be, you don't necessarily start with a Spren companion or anything. If you start at level 1, you're going to start as just a heroic character. And so then as you play, first of all, Spren give the GM a tool to kind of signal to the players what actions are going to potentially, attract certain types of Spren or bring them on the paths to a certain Radiant order. But once characters start on the path of bonding that Spren, represents their ideals and is kind of this reinforcing mechanism as they pursue their goals to swear an ideal. And they're a tool for the GM to use to kind of talk to the player. But as I mentioned earlier, they're also a tool for the player to express themselves. And it's controlling that Spren and telling the story of that Spren is a collaborative process between the player and the GM. So the player actually gets tools to use that Spren during play. There's a bunch of different abilities that Spren can do for you. Usually you spend that mental resource focus to coordinate with your Spren, maybe have them spy for you, stick, if it's a wind Spren, stick somebody's hand to something, other abilities like that. And so you have these tools that as a player you can use to use your Spren in tricky situations. But beyond that, when you're a Radiant, you gain access to a Radiant path. Each path has 3 different sections. 2 of those are going to represent your 2 surges, but that last one represents your bond to your Spren and your ideals. And so as you advance through that tree, not only are you going to be swearing ideals, but you can take talents that represent the resonances between your 2 surges and improve your bond with your Spren, whether that be letting your Spren get farther distances away from you, or giving your Spren abilities to use based on the nature of that Spren. I used Wind Spren as an example, but we see other things happen with Cultivation Spren and the Cryptics. They all have their own unique abilities, and so each Radiant Order has some talents reflecting what your Spren might be able to do for you.
And I lied. One last question.
That's
Speaking
fine.
of Spren, I'm assuming it's built into the mechanics and general narrative of the story that people who are trying to go this Radiant route can do things to upset their Spren. Again, kind of a broad question, if you wouldn't mind digging into that, if that is built into the game, what that could look like.
I was going to say, not really a broad question. Okay. I have a page for you on abandoning your oaths. No, so following, we talked a lot about following your ideals, swearing ideals as these goals, but abandoning them or forsaking them is also an important part. Player characters are often pulled in lots of directions, and they might not be able to follow their ideals as closely as they want to. And when that happens, you end up degrading your bond with your Spren and potentially losing access to some of your powers, like we see happen with Kaladin in Book 3. And eventually, if you go too far, you can potentially forsake your bond and end that relationship forever. That's a pretty extreme situation, and you're going to get a lot of warnings along the way, usually, but it is in the game.
Maybe we'll just put a lot of this behind a spoiler thread, because the next question I have is, we have seen this in the books. What about those who want to try and pursue 2 different orders?
Oh, yeah, we're getting into the questions here. Well, you can try.
Okay, try the operative word, it seems.
You have to juggle the ideals of 2 different orders, right? And the particularities of 2 different Spren. So, we talked to Brandon about this, and it's certainly possible, but it's incredibly difficult. And so you can try, but I think a lot of people are going to see maybe easier success with pursuing just one ideal at a time.
Perfect. Andrew, I have taken too much of your time. Thank you so much for
thank you.
Chatting with us. Kickstarter is out now. Feel free to go check out the page. And I think you're going to be doing an AMA next Friday the 9th, or is it Saturday the 10th?
Saturday the 10th.
Saturday the 10th.
Yep.
So jump onto Reddit and go ask a question if you need to learn more.
Yeah, come say hi.
Thank you again.
Yeah, thank you.